big news yesterday in the last 24 hours, maybe it was 36. Jon Jones has added Richard Schaefer, the former CEO of Golden Boy, as an advisor. And, of course, that's big for us because the whole world wants to see Francis Ngannou versus Jon Jones, though the UFC seems to be leaning towards Francis Ngannou and Derek Lewis because they haven't been able to come to an agreement with Jon Jones. Jon Jones has already parted ways with their longtime managers and that guided his career for a long time, and now he seems to have come up with Richard Schaefer as somebody who can maybe make that deal happen. The more I'm thinking about it, the more I'm looking at it, it looks like he may have picked the right guy. What do you think?
Well, I've been in boxing for a long time, longer than I want to stay here. And Richard's probably one of the 2 or 3 smartest guys that I've, run into. Extremely smart guy. He didn't know he was a banker. He comes from a banking family, so he knew nothing about boxing 20 years ago, but he learned a lot, and at this point, he's one of the sharpest guys in the business. Now, the downside, I guess, or maybe it's not a downside at all, is that he hasn't worked in mixed martial arts, but maybe that doesn't matter. Yeah.
So he's got the banking experience, and then as CEO, he knows how to, promote a pay-per-view and I guess the behind the scenes that we aren't privy to because the UFC kind of doesn't really expose that. In boxing, we know all the purses. It's pretty public, but in MMA, it's not always like that. And here's another thing. I think there's always a politics game in combat sports, one way or another, especially when it comes to the big fights. He's no longer with Golden Boy, and the first thing that caught my eye was that Dana White was saying, that's a good guy, I like that guy. So right away, De La Hoya and Dana White don't get along. Just that meeting will be pleasant just to get things started, just because of that, I imagine. But I just think they have a lot of things in common. I think they can come to some sort of an understanding that'll be fair for all parties.
Yeah, obviously we can guess how things might turn out, but I read the same thing. Dana obviously respects Richard, and I understand why. Richard's a sharp guy, and it's not just that he's been a promoter, which he has. He's also made a lot of deals behind the scenes, a lot of big deals. So he knows how to negotiate. He knows how to work with people in that way. So, yeah, it sounds like they'll hit the ground running. Now, as I understand it, though, Jones is under contract with UFC, and it sounds like that Dana White really holds all the cards. But the good thing is he's willing to sit down and talk to Richard, and we'll see what happens.
What are your thoughts as you've seen our sport grow while covering boxing all these years? Do you feel like a proper heavyweight fight has closed the gap on what a proper heavyweight fight is in boxing? Like, everyone's fired up about Fury and Wilder. Looks like it's going to happen at Allegiant Stadium. That's a monster, and I think that's what the UFC had their sights set on. Do you think MMA is kind of closing the gap? And I know they won't make the type of salaries that they do in boxing, but again, are they closing the gap?
I think they closed the gap. I mean, if you're talking about specifically heavyweights, yeah, maybe they are. Maybe maybe their biggest heavyweights coming up, but I think they closed the gap in general, a while ago. I think they're competing, if that's the right word. I think they're competing on even terms now for several years. I don't know about you. You'd have to tell me whether there's been other big heavyweight fights in MMA, but I'll tell you this, there's nothing, you just mentioned it, there's nothing like a big heavyweight fight. I mean, they have that heavyweight fight at Allegiant Stadium. The place is just going to be rocking. I go back to the Mike Tyson years. There was nothing ever even close to a Mike Tyson heavyweight fight. Mike Tyson, Evander Holyfield, 1 and 2. Biggest things that I've ever experienced in boxing. It was unbelievable. And if UFC just gets even a little piece of that, it's going to be very special.
I want to go back to Jon Jones for just a brief second. Attaining this new mentor and just the situation that he's in, is Richard Schaefer all about getting Jon Jones what he wants, what he believes he deserves, or is he just there to kind of fix the damage that's already done? What do you think, Michael?
That's a good question, but I would be speculating. I'm pretty confident when I say it's both of those things. Didn't Jones is pretty firm, he wants what he wants. And it sounds like Dana White wants to give him what he wants to give him. So there's an impasse there. But you just mentioned Chafer and Dana White have a good relationship, so that's a good start. And I think that's a good point that you bring up. I think it'll also smooth over whatever problems there might be between Dana White and Jon Jones. Richard's been there a million times. He's done this a million times. I'd like to be a fly on the wall, but I'm sure things will go well.
Michael, in mixed martial art, or in boxing, in the history of boxing, there's been people who have big positions that have almost turned into characters. You know, I remember growing up, Don King he had a lot of power, but he was also a little bit of a character. And sometimes Dana White can play that role in our business. When Triller came up and these type of fights started, obviously, you know the stance of the UFC. They haven't really liked this very much. But the one thing that we don't really hear too much is on the boxing side, the promoters in boxing and just the boxing fans, the writers. What is your feeling on Triller and these type of fights? How do you feel about them?
Well, listen, I'm an old school guy. I'm sort of a purist. I don't really like it. You know, it might be entertaining on some level, but I don't really like it. It's just not really boxing. And I've heard several boxers say that it's just entertainment. It's not really boxing. So if you look at it that way, it's okay. But it's drawing attention and money away from guys who've devoted their whole lives to this. I mean, Jake Paul and Logan Paul are just brilliant at marketing themselves, and that's why they're making the money that they're making. So, you know, God bless them from a capitalism standpoint, from a supply and demand. But the downside is that there's a lot of boxers, good boxers, who would love to make that kind of money and get that kind of attention. I don't bemoan them this opportunity, though. It's supply and demand. If people want it, I can't blame them for doing it. Same goes for the old retired fighters, Mike Tyson, Evander Holyfield, assuming he comes back. De La Hoya's talked about coming back. If they can make money, I don't blame them. But in my mind, I separate the two. It's not really boxing. It's just a show.
Do you feel like anything that they're doing, if they continue to keep doing this over a period of time, will they have some kind of impact on MMA and on boxing? Will MMA and boxing have to maybe reformat strategy a little bit to contend with these types of things coming up?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think what they do well, you know, I sort of alluded to it, Jake and Logan Paul are really good at self-marketing. Maybe boxers can learn from that and do a better job of that. I mean, Mayweather was a master at that. I mean, nobody was better at marketing himself than Mayweather, which is why he became essentially a billionaire or close to it. So from that side, yeah, you could do that. Another thing maybe is they combine them like they have in the past. I don't know, like the Mayweather-Logan Paul fight's got real fights on the undercard. So maybe you do that because then you draw in more fans that otherwise wouldn't be watching boxing. I don't know, you know, they've been doing this a long time in boxing, and big fights still sell. You don't need to put on this kind of show, but in terms of the overall health of the sport, maybe we can learn from that in that respect, from a marketing standpoint. You learn some things. You know, the Triller show, for example, the Tyson Roy Jones show, that was really fun to watch from a production standpoint. I mean, the broadcast, the telecast, you know, the guys on camera, it was really entertaining. More entertaining, I think, than the average boxing card. So maybe they can learn from that also.
You know, you brought up time in the Sunshine State. I imagine you're covering Mayweather, Paul, but then one of my favorite fighters, Teofimo, is fighting like 2 weeks later, right? In defending his titles.
Yeah, we got a lot of big stuff coming up. Yeah, Lopez is huge now. One victory over Vasily Lomachenko, and he's the man. Yeah, he's one of the handful of biggest guys in boxing right now. And this guy that he's fighting is not a pushover either. It's Australian guy, George Kambosos, tough guy. I think Teofimo wins, but that's a real fight.
And Loma fights the week after that, right? I want to see them fight one more time. Though I think Lopez, I didn't know he was the truth that early. You know, he did a number on Loma, but I think Loma fights the week after, and I'd like to see them fight again. Do you think that fight can be made again, or was it too decisive the first time?
Another good question. I think it can be made. I think if Lopez wants it, that's the key. I mean, there's a lot of options out there for Lopez now. Maybe he fights Josh Taylor, who just beat Jose Ramirez to unify all the 140-pound titles. Lopez would have to go up and weight. I think he likes that idea. I think it would sell. I think a second Lopez-Lomachenko fight would sell. And I wouldn't be surprised if Lomachenko won the second fight. It took him half a fight to get going, but I think he won the second half of the fight. So I think it would be competitive. At the same time, Lomachenko's not a spring chicken anymore. He's not getting any younger, so I don't know. But yeah, I love that fight. And I think Lomachenko's done enough to earn a second shot.
Michael, George and I grew up watching boxing. That was something that we did a lot of. And we're the first guys, being the MMA guys, whenever they match up an MMA guy and a boxing guy, we're the first ones to step up and go, you guys are crazy if you think this MMA guy's going to – I mean, these are guys that have been doing this their entire life. It's no disrespect to the MMA guy, but it's just different.
It's a different sport. Yeah.
It's a different sport. However, Anderson Silva and Julio Cesar Chavez, that's coming up. And my brain says Julio Cesar Chavez all day, of course. But if there were one guy for me to be scared about, it's Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., who in big boxing fights seems to not have taken training camps very seriously. He just doesn't seem to have the same heart that his father did. Does this fight in any way scare you at all?
Well, scare might not be the right word because I really don't care. Just because Chavez really isn't much of a factor in boxing anymore. But my gut tells me the same thing your gut tells me. Chavez is, he may have lost in his biggest fights and might have had some issues with discipline, but he's still a real fighter with a lot of experience. I think he's going to destroy Silva, absolutely destroy him. But who knows? Yeah, if Chavez is out partying, as we're recording this radio show, doing this radio show, then he might have a problem. We'll see. He has to take it seriously. I would agree with that. But in terms of experience and level of skill, and isn't Silva 46 years old or something like that? Yeah. So I think he's in trouble, to be honest with you. Chavez is a real fighter, and he could crack. He can hurt you. I've seen him hurt good fighters. Now, it's a long time ago, but it's not like he's an old man. He has something left in the tank.
2 more questions, and we're really appreciative of your time. We're excited to talk about the sweet science. So sorry that we've pivoted to outside of Chafer. But back to Chafer, what do you think is the most important thing that maybe he can highlight to Dana White where he can maybe make Dana bring his number up a little bit? Because, again, in boxing, it seems to me, these are rough numbers. 80% goes to the athletes, 20% to the promoter. In our sport, it seems to be the reverse. What can Chafer maybe point out to Dana White that can help him at least be the less stubborn of the two? Maybe bring up Jones's pay because it would be massive in Ngannou versus Jones. Do you think there's anything from his boxing experience that he can bring to Dana White that Dana White may not know, who also has been a part of boxing, but obviously not as entrenched as Chafer?
Well, I'll try to get into the mind of a manager, a negotiator. So basically, he's just it's like selling anything. It's like selling a product. He's got to sell Dana White on Jones's value as a fighter and what he brings and how much money he generates, that kind of thing. The problem could be is I don't think it works that way in MMA, in the UFC. Everything seems to be more set. Dana White decides how much the guy's going to get, and that kind of thing. Boxing is like wide open every time they start negotiations. It's like anything's possible. I mean, there's certain parameters. They look at pay-per-view numbers, that kind of thing. So you try to estimate a guy's value. To be honest, I don't really know how it works in the UFC. So, and I'm not sure that Richard does. I'm sure he's done his research and he's talked to people, and he probably has a better handle on it now than he did. But tell me if I'm wrong, but it's really a different world.
Sorry there, we lost you at the very end. You said, tell me if I'm wrong, and what was the rest?
I mean, it seems like they're two different worlds, it's different business models.
Yeah.
And I'm not as familiar with the UFC side, so I don't know how much room there is to negotiate, would be my question.
I think I would start off with, do you really want to be the guy that didn't fill up that stadium with Ngannou versus Jon Jones? Because Dana White thrives on delivering the big fights. He said for a while that boxing, sometimes there was too many politics, promoters would clash, and we wouldn't get the big fights. You remember the big delay on getting Pacquiao and Mayweather together. He says that wasn't going to happen in our sport. So I think I would almost use his own words against him.
Very good. I like that. You should be in the room for Jon Jones also. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you tell me, is Jones the biggest? I mean, he's the biggest star ever in the sport, right? So, I mean, yeah, I would just, that's what I would bring to the guys. I mean, it doesn't get any bigger than that if I'm reading this correctly.
He's probably one of five. I guess McGregor, Ronda Rousey, Brock Lesnar, yeah, Jon Jones, George St. Pierre. He'd probably be in that group of five. Let's close with this. Pacquiao, 2 years he hasn't fought, and he's fighting the great Errol Spence. But, boy, do I salute him, because that guy just runs towards the toughest, more challenging fights. I know he's won, I think, 8 different divisions, titles in 8 different divisions or something like that. If he can beat Errol Spence, which I don't think he will, but if he could, does he kind of go down as like one of the top fighters ever, top boxers ever? That would be very impressive at his age, too, 42.
Well, I think he already is. I mean, he could, if for some reason he can't fight Spence, he already is one of the best of all time. I thought you were going to say, is he the number 1 best of all time? And I'm not sure that's going to ever happen. But, yeah, I wrote this column. I mean, he could have fought just any Joe Schmo and made a lot of money and just sort of cruised into retirement. But instead, he decides to fight a total badass, you know, one of the 2 or 3 or 4 best fighters in the world. And I thought I couldn't have any more admiration for Pacquiao than I already did, but I do. I admire him now more than ever. And I hope that other boxers and athletes, I guess, are watching this, because that's how it's done. That's the ideal, what Pacquiao did. He's going to test himself until the very last minute he's in the sport, and he's just an absolute legend.
Yeah, I was probably going to say top 3 is the highest I would go, because there's been some great ones. But, hey, Michael, this was awesome, and hopefully we can lean on you in the future, as we obviously our sports are crossing over. We're both part of the Junkie family, so hopefully we can do a little bit more of this when these big fights come up.
Please do. This was fun. I want to do it again.
Thank you, sir, for your time. Have a good day.
All right, guys. Take care.